Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 62. Is this the best RPG book of all time? With Lou Prosperi and Richard Dansky.
Greetings, one and all, to this podcast. A podcast that's, I think, in need of a new name and maybe a rebrand. So if you have any suggestions for what to call this podcast and you're a regular listener, please let us know. But I am apparently controversial historian Ben Riggs, and we are here tonight with two incredible luminaries from the world of tabletop role-playing games. My first guess is a legend in the world of game design and storytelling. Richard Dansky is best known as the mind behind some of the darkest and most compelling corners of the world of darkness. He served as the developer for Wraith the Oblivion and helped shape the haunting masterpiece which we are discussing today, Charnel Houses of Europe, the Shoah. But Richard's also a veteran of the video game industry. He's worked as a writer and narrative designer. My favorite pieces of his work in this realm are the 2004 Far Cry and Driver. He's a novelist, storyteller, and someone who knows how to make horror feel deeply uncomfortably human, cough, cough, soul forging, even if that wasn't your idea. Please welcome to the show, Richard Dansky.
Hello.
So, and if you don't know what soul forging is, listeners, that is in Wraith the Oblivion in the afterlife. Things are made out of souls. So like souls are the ghosts of things are heated and then beaten down into objects, and they just become an object, like a brick, a chair, a sword. And everyone assumes that the consciousness of the wraith, the ghost, ends in the process, but sometimes the things like cry or moan, and that was one of the things that really, put a hook in me back in the day. My next guest is a name well known to fans of classic fantasy role-playing games, Lou Prosperi. I should have asked, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes.
Hurrah, hooray! Lou was the developer of Earthdawn at FASA, a beloved post-apocalyptic fantasy game where magic, horror, and high adventure collided. His work helped define the rich mythic tone of that setting, making Earthdawn one of the most unique fantasy role-playing games of the 1990s. Lou, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I would like to start with a summary of the book we're going to discuss today. And just to be clear, if you're listening to this, we're going to be talking about some disturbing stuff. I cried reading this book, which I think is a first for a tabletop role-playing game book. And it would not surprise me, depending on how this discussion goes, if I ended up crying during this discussion. So I'm just laying that out there right now. And we are discussing Charnel Houses of Europe, the Shoah. It's a profound, unsettling supplement that turns the Holocaust into a Wraith narrative. It melds historical documentation with tabletop role-playing game drama. It looks at what happens when millions of the dead arrive in the afterlife all at once. It causes a crisis in the hierarchy. The hierarchy is the kind of nasty government ruling the Western afterlife. The response of the hierarchy to all these souls showing up is actually quite remarkable. In an arrangement called the Covenant of the Millions, they decide to actually give space to the dead of the Holocaust to allow them to govern themselves. And they also decide to allow the Shoah dead to hunt down Nazis in the afterlife. The book's strength lies in its gravity and respect for its subject. It's not a casual horror romp, but a rigorous, emotionally charged exploration. It's from White Wolf's Black Dog Gaming imprint, which means use with care. And I'd say the same about this conversation. Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss here, but I'm just going to start with a question for Rich and then take my hands off the reins and let conversation bloom. Rich, can you tell us the story of the creation of this book?
I can do that, and thank you for having me here. Back in the day at White Wolf, we had schedules to create for our product lines, and there were certain boxes that needed to be checked, and one of the boxes that needed to be checked was a Black Dog title. And the previous Black Dog title for Wraith had been Spectres, which was a very, very dark book about role-playing souls that had gone over to the other side. And I thought that was a fascinating book. It had been commissioned by Jennifer Hartshorn, who was the developer before I got there, and an incredibly talented developer. But it opened a lot of doors in terms of where we could go with Wraith that maybe other games hadn't explored or couldn't explore. And so it came my turn, and I looked around, and we were doing a lot of marketing on the phrase, role-playing for mature minds. And we're doing content that put supernatural figures behind all the events of world history, except for this one period in the middle of the 20th century. And at that time, at the same time, the Holocaust was very much in my mind. My sister was working for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, recording the testimony of survivors. And it was important work, and she was doing some real good in the world with that. And I thought about it, and I thought, okay, if we're going to do gaming for mature minds, let's do gaming for mature minds. Let's go all the way. Let's do something with this that is more than just a light gloss of vampires on history. Let's deep dive into it, and Wraith is the perfect game to do that, because the game is about unfinished business and loss and regret and what tragedies happen to you in life that you're trying to resolve now. And I thought long and hard before I pitched it, and I laid down for myself the rules of doing this book, one of which is obviously to be respectful, 2, to be rigorously researched, and 3, to keep a very hard, fast line between the actual historical content and then the extrapolated Wraith content on top of that. But all of that was built on one principal foundation, which was that people did this. We were never going to blame this on ghosts or vampires or werewolves or anything else. People did this. And so everything flowed out of that. And I burned the midnight oil for numerous nights putting this pitch together when I was putting my schedule together. And to their credit, first Ken Cliff, the manager of design at White Wolf, and then the senior management gave it the green light and let me do this book. And I laid out, here are the issues we are likely to face doing this, but I think it's important that we do that. And they went on board with it. I think part of it was because Wraith was sort of the Deep Space Nine of the World of Darkness, in that.
More. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. But I was off over in the afterlife doing my own thing while the vampires were blown up over here and werewolves were blown over here and mages blown over here. And those were big front-facing stuff. And Wraith had this steady drumbeat in the background of people who loved it, but the spotlight wasn't on it. And I feel that may have given me a little more creative leeway to attempt this project. And so with that in mind, and once I got the go-ahead, I sat down to map it out, to outline it. And I was very lucky to have as a really close friend, a man named Mark Sensick, who wrote under the pen name Jonathan Black, who at the time was studying, doing his graduate work on Nazi propaganda and how that was used and implemented. So he was a subject matter expert that I could draw on. And Rob Hatch, who was another one of the folks at White Wolf at the time, was incredibly sympathetic to the project and pretty much demanded to be a part of it. And I knew from his previous work that I could trust him to be respectful and do a great job with it. And while I was doing this, I reached out to the author Janet Berliner, who was someone that I knew and was friendly with, and who had mentored me with my fiction a bit, and who had a personal connection to the source material, and sought her advice. And she ultimately agreed to do the foreword to the book. And there's a phrase in that foreword that I think resonates and explains why we needed to do this book, which is teach them where they will learn. And obviously, when the project was announced, there was immense pushback. This is inappropriate for a game. This is inappropriate material for a role-playing game. But if you look back through the history of addressing the subject material from art, every time someone attempted to grapple with this subject matter in an artistic space, at the time they were told this is inappropriate. And that was music, and that was fiction. And when Art Spiegelman did Mouse, comics are inappropriate for this. And I looked at all that and I thought, one, it is never a question of the medium, it's a question of how it is handled within the medium, because each medium can tell stories in its own way if handled with craft and care and skill. And two, this was my medium. This was how I could communicate with the world. This was how I could tell the story best. And I felt I had, for lack of a better word, a responsibility to use my voice in this medium, to use my skill, to use the talents of the people who trusted me to do this, to create something that would tell the story in a way that people who maybe didn't read Mouse, who maybe weren't interested in reading Eloise Wiesel, could pick up and find their way into the material through that. And obviously, this was the ambition of a 26, 27-year-old guy who was, largely fresh out of grad school and had wild ideas, but it was something that I was very much driven to do. And I will say, one, the support I got from everybody on the project, in-house at White Wolf, the art team, the artists who worked on the project, they all were incredibly supportive of the project, did their best work, were amazing in making sure we got this right. And two, in all the years and all the books I've worked on stuff, there have been 2 times I broke down and cried while working on a project. And both of them were on this. And the first one, it was just seeing it coming together. The second one was, I was at the office and it was like 1:30 in the morning, because those were the hours I kept in those days. And it was on my birthday. And the fax machine kicked up and it started spitting out the first draft of Janet Berliner's introduction to the book. And I pulled it off the fax machine. I sat down, I read it, and I just sat there and I cried my eyes out, because the enormity of what this project was and what it could be, and the good it could possibly do, and also the harm it could do if we did it wrong, just hit me all in that moment. And there was incredible backlash. There was a whole lot of internet outrage. And I made sure to try and engage with everyone who spoke out on Alt Games, White Wolf, things like that, and say, hey, this is what we are doing. This is why we are doing it. Let me share some of the book with you. Let me show you the outline. Let me show you the art. And I engaged with the people who were ranting and whatnot, sight unseen, as best I could. And I'm happy to say that a whole lot of those folks were willing to take new information and publicly say, I've seen it. This is something different. This is something good. I mean, obviously the reputation White Wolf had at the time for getting its facts right was, there were, shall we say, some historical hiccups in some of the other books. But the fact that folks were willing to let me reach out to them and try and get it straight, try and explain to them what we were doing. And I was never like, you have to see. It was like, here's what we're doing. Please give it a chance. And then I actually got a phone call of support from Harlan Ellison. After the project got announced, I got a letter from the Anti-Defamation League suggesting they were very concerned about how I was turning the Holocaust into the game, which was absolutely not what I was doing, and that they were going to come pay a visit. And I freaked out. And Janet said, why don't you talk to Harlan? He went through this exact same thing on the I Have No Mouth, I Must Scream video game. And I said, I can't talk to Harlan. She said, sure you can. Here's his address. Because she knew him. And so I spent a week crafting a letter to Mr. Ellison, because if you're going to send a letter to Harlan Ellison, you damn well better do it right. And I packed in the manuscript and the art and everything, and I sent it off. And I didn't hear anything. I figured it's Harlan Ellison, he's busy. And then one day I'm sitting at my desk and the phone rings and I pick it up and I hear, Dansky. Yes, this is Ellison. And he launched into this incredibly potent obscene rant of 100% support for what I was doing and how this was incredibly important to be doing, that we had to take the chance to tell the story everywhere we could and every way we could in whatever medium we could tell it well, and just 100% backing what I was doing and cheering me on and telling me, go ahead and do this right. And, this is like a 10-minute phone call, and I'm holding the phone over here, and I've, gone deaf in my right ear. I'm hearing my left ear. The phone is melting as I'm holding it. And at the end of it, he wraps up with, "You got that?" I say, "Yes, sir." "Good." Click. So
What you wouldn't have done for a AI transcription service back then, no?
No. No, that needed to live in the moment.
And Richard, your video dropped for some reason. It's not a big deal, but if it's a button, if you could push it, that'd be great. But other than if there's another reason, it's fine. There you are.
Okay, good. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
That must have been the Wraith curse.
There it was. I didn't want to interrupt because you were rolling so well. But
thank you.
I guess I'll ask Lou. Did you know any people that were online in the '90s saying maybe White Wolf shouldn't make a Wraith book?
I knew at least one. So I was one of the people within the game industry who vocally spoke out and said I didn't feel it was appropriate subject matter for role-playing games. For the most part, my view is that we play these games for entertainment, escapism, fun, and very clearly the Holocaust is not a subject that aligns with those. But it's clear that the medium of role-playing games can do more than just fun and silly and escapism. It can be used to deal with serious subjects. And as I recall, I only confronted Rich about this on a private mailing list that was called Weasel or Weasel, depending on what it was. But it was a mailing back before there were like you mentioned, alt White Wolf games. There were those message boards, but there weren't forums like we have now. There certainly wasn't social media. There wasn't Discord or any of that. And I kept my comments to that private list, and I just said, I don't agree with this, and I don't think I was especially belligerent or obnoxious about it. But I know that Rich and I did have an exchange of a few emails about it. I remember that. And I remember, I believe at a trade show, you provided a photocopy of the proof of the book to some of the folks that were there, I think to Jill Lucas and Tara Gallagher, who are our marketing folks at the time, and they brought it back to the office. And a lot of the folks at FASA, I don't know if they exactly shared my opinion, but they were on the fence about, FASA would never have published a book like that. We certainly did some horror things, particularly in the Earthdawn line. There's a book about the horrors, the bad creatures in Earthdawn, and they do some despicable things, but they're creatures that do despicable things. It's a very different type of horror, obviously. And so I remember at the time flipping through it. I did not read it all the way, and I don't think it was mine to take and keep. I think Jill or Tara or somebody else held on to it, but I did flip through it a little bit. I don't have any memory of what I saw at the time. But I do want to take the moment now here publicly to say that I think I was wrong to confront you the way I did, Rich. I think clearly role-playing games, like I said, can do more than just fun. They can be used for serious storytelling. And the line that you mentioned from the forward, I didn't remember it, but it speaks. It really addresses this, which is tell them where they'll hear it, I think, or something like that, right? Which is, for musicians, you need to make it a song, and for theater people, you may need to put it on stage, but for gamers, you need to put it in a format or a medium where they can get that message. And the other, point that she makes, which you make, which is this is a story that needs to be told over and over and over again. We can't let this, we can't, never forget. I mean, didn't make
Mhm.
that up obviously, but it's nonetheless true. Um, and one of the pieces that really struck me when I reading this was one of the introductory quotes to the history chapter. Um, it's quoted by an SS corporal to Simon Wiesenthal,
Mhm.
where he says, and I'll read it if you don't mind. Um, you would tell the truth, and you know what would happen. They wouldn't believe you. They'd say you were crazy, might even put you in a madhouse. How can anyone believe this terrible business unless he has lived through it? That's and as I read the book, I mean, um, I haven't read or studied a whole lot about it.
Mhm.
Seen Schindler's List, seen some other things. But as I read the book, I kept going back to that in my mind, thinking this can't be real. And
Mhm.
and the more you learn, it seems like it can't be true. And so it's important to tell these stories so that history doesn't forget.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was what I wanted to do. This was my way of telling the story. And I wanted to make sure that, again, it was respectful, that the historical stuff and the game stuff were kept delineated, but
Right.
that the,
Yeah.
the game stuff was an outgrowth of the sort of emotional truth
Hmm.
of what had happened. And it allowed people to grapple with it in a way they could. And I'm going to jump tracks a little bit here. When I was announced as the developer for Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition, I got a ton of emails and messages from folks about the project. And a theme that kept on coming up over and over and over and over again was, hey, Wraith was really important to me. It gave me a safe space when I was in a really bad place and let me work out some stuff for myself. Hey, this game helped me figure out who I am. Hey, this game saved my life by giving me a place to go and a way to deal with stuff. And literally, people were saying that it saved their life. And that spoke to a deeper truth that, yes, we play these games for fun, and some of these games are designed explicitly for fun. At the same time, these are powerful tools for approaching serious stuff in a safe space where you can do it experimentally and without immediate real world consequence, where you can grapple with stuff that's heavy and dangerous and scary and come to terms with it in that step, one step removed, in that space, one step removed from where you are in the real world. And that was something that I think I understood subconsciously when I was making the book, and that became clear to me while I was making the book, and then got hammered home when Wraith 20 happened. And I was, yeah, I think I was always very clear that I felt that I was in a unique place with Wraith, which is so much about personal tragedy uh, and my own personal family heritage. I mean, my family did not lose folks in the Holocaust. My immediate family was all over here before that happened. But even so, as a member of the Jewish community, this was something that I was learning about from a very, very young age. And so I felt I was in a position where I could bring that story forward respectfully. And I was asked if I would do similar books for other tragedies, and I said, no, I can't do that. Those aren't my stories to tell. I could not do those justice. But what I hoped was that by planting a flag for this sort of material in the role playing space, by saying it can be done well, it can be done powerfully, and it can be done positively, that it would open the door for other people to explore topics that previously were not on the table, and in their own time and in their own way, and expand the borders of what we did because we could do so much with this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And over the years, I've gotten comments about people who enjoyed Earthdawn and things like that. And it's very flattering and honoring to me that I created something that they got so much enjoyment out of. And so I
Mhm.
can only imagine the sense of fulfillment that you get when you hear about people that it actually helped them, work through issues in their lives and had a more profound impact on their life than just I had fun on last Saturday night when we killed a
Mhm.
dragon. It's a very different type of
Mhm.
quote enjoyment, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's fantastic that people got that kind of um, experience out of the game. It's a very fulfilling experience when you hear from people that enjoyed your work, right? And it's one thing, like I said, to hear that they had fun. It's another to hear that you helped them become the person they are. You helped them find their way. You helped them work through issues, save their life, whatever it might be. So
It's
that's
the word that I always use, honestly, is humbling.
right.
The
Yeah.
fact that something that I created in conjunction with writers and editors and artists was the thing that these people picked up and found their own way with. I didn't help them. I gave them a tool.
Right.
I don't want any credit for anything that is not mine. I am glad that I was able to facilitate that. And it is, again, humbling that work that I guided or contributed to has been useful, has been powerful, has been meaningful, and still resonates for some folks.
Yeah.
I was
So
just checking I was just checking behind me because I was looking for a copy of Dangerous Games by Joseph P. Laycock, which is mostly about satanic panics, both against D&D and World of Darkness. But he has a section where he talks about the psychological impact of role-playing games and how often it does change people. A good role-playing game changes a person's whole life. I'm sorry, Lou, I talked over you though. You go
no,
ahead.
it's okay. It's okay. Um, I I guess so. I am curious. Was there debate? I mean, it sounds like you got support from Ken as well as Steve and Stewart and Mark was still there at the time, right?
Uh,
Um,
Mark was out in San Francisco at the time. I think
right.
he was not involved in those conversations that I recall at all.
But was there any debate within the company about it? About like other developers? I was just curious if it was if or if pretty much everybody on board. I mean, I remember my experience. It was a small. Our office was pretty small. I think your office was not that different. Everybody knows what everybody's working on.
Mhm.
Um, so I wonder, was there much debate or questions or concerns?
There were respectful questions raised. How are you going to do this? How do you want to approach this? But mostly it was, how can we help? How can we do this right? Like Rob
Mm,
Hatch was another developer at the time. He was literally the first person to climb on board. Rich Thomas, who's the art director, was 100% on board from the get-go. And I am sure that behind the scenes, he was pushing for the project as soon as I
mm,
proposed it. And it was an incredibly supportive environment. It was very much, how can we do this right? Everybody was very concerned with making sure we got it right. Um, Matt Milberger, who was the layout artist on the book, told me that it was the hardest book he had done to that point because he was so worried about getting it right, and he did an amazing job. It's a beautiful book.
yeah,
And just in terms of the way it's laid out and the way the text is presented and the art, and it's just there was no rah-rah. There was quiet and thoughtful and steady
right.
support.
Yeah,
And that was, I think, even more important. And yeah, everyone I talked with the company was behind it. Kathy Ryan, who laid out the ad in the back of the book, um, the other developers, the editorial staff. It was very much a team effort. And I think everybody realized this was something that could be an important moment for the studio, for good or for bad. I mean, if we had botched it, hell would have rained down. And they were
yeah,
willing to trust me to get it right. And that meant a great deal.
yeah. I mean, I know you wrote some of it, and you want to defer a lot of the credit to some of the other authors and creators, but the piece that I'm certain that you worked on was the introduction, right? Which is,
Yeah.
and I think the introduction does a fantastic job, really, of explaining the why, and it addresses a lot of the concerns that people like me raised at the time.
Mhm.
Why do this? And and I expect, like I said, I mean, I know you confirmed I wasn't the only one who raised
Mhm.
concerns. Um, And I expect, or I would think that some of those concerns may have come up before you got to even writing the introduction, because often that becomes the last thing we do, right? Because we don't know what the book is until we're done, right?
Yeah.
But as I read through that, I'm like, yep, I had that question. Yep, I had that one. Yep, and in the end, I agree. The reasons were valid and good. Like you
Thank you.
very much addressed the answer of why do a book like this.
Thank you. Yeah. My development style, I will confess, was always question driven. Every time I sat down to outline a book, I would list out the questions that I would want from that as a player, the questions I would want answered in that book. And this book was no exception, except the questions were a lot heavier than, okay, what new powers are there? And so it was not a difference of type, it was a difference of degree, I guess, the way I approached it. But I always thought and mapped out in some detail before I ever proposed a book, and this book triply so. Just again, because I was grappling with those things from the get-go, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to cause trouble for my sister, honestly. I wanted to be sure that I was going to do this right for the company. I was going to do right for the memory of the people that we were addressing in this book, for the people who are, the survivors who are still living with it. And that meant that I carefully planned every step I took on that road, from the first paragraph of writing the book proposal in the schedule, to the pitch that I gave management, to the outline that I gave the authors, to the pitch that I gave the other people in the building, to every post I put on Usenet. It was all, none of it was improvised. All of it was thought out and heartfelt, but considered, because it was so important to never make a misstep.
Right. You weren't just making a book about elves.
Yeah.
Right,
there's nothing wrong with a book about elves. I am all for books about elves, just that wasn't the book I was making.
Right.
Can I read from the introduction for a moment?
Sure.
Please.
So this is the beginning of the introduction. What is this book? This book is an attempt to do something different with the power of storytelling. In these pages is a history and a series of stories detailing things that did happen and what their effects might have been in the world of darkness. And the world, if you don't know, the world of darkness is the White Wolf setting of the 90s. The idea is not to trivialize the Holocaust, to reduce it to the level of just a game. Rather, the concept behind this book is to use the medium of role-playing as another way to tell the story of the Shoah, the story that must constantly be told. The words of this book are not intended to be fun to read. If you are looking for the opportunity to skin ride Colonel Klink and Sergeant Schultz and change the course of history, you've picked up the wrong text. Rather, Charnel Houses is intended as an examination of consequences. What could such horrible suffering produce in the Shadowlands? The Shadowlands is the afterlife. Were the Shadowlands real? If the Shadowlands were real, what would the horrible suffering produce there? What heights of heroism and depths of villainy might these events produce in the souls of the dead? Wraith is about unfinished business and passion, and surely the 12 million souls who died in the events of the Shoah had much that they had left unfinished. After all is said and done, the Holocaust was and is a purely human tragedy. The book does not attempt to move the blame from where it belongs. The vampires and wraiths didn't make anyone do it. The Garou and the mages didn't manipulate events behind the scenes to create the Shoah. In the context of the world of darkness, some supernatural beings took advantage of or perished in the atrocities, but first, last, and always, the world of darkness Holocaust was the idea and the work of human beings, just like in the real world. And I think that does a great job of pointing for what you're trying to do with this, and you really did pull it off.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think one of the other interesting observations I made is what's not in this book. and you tread very lightly about how to use it. And each chapter, once you get past the main history piece, there's 4 or 5 chapters about, and I'm assuming or guessing that you sought archetypal types of sites that played a part, right? There was a ghetto,
Yes.
there's a ghetto in Warsaw, there's finally Auschwitz, which is, obviously the penultimate of the worst of the places. And so you have these archetypal sites. And each talks about its history. There's some sidebars about World of Darkness stuff that may be related. A portraits of some characters. And honestly, the game statistics are jarring. They jump out like they don't belong almost, but obviously I understand why I would want them. And then there's just a handful of story ideas. But there's no how to use this book in your game, how to run an adventure. And I think I had a lot of questions about how I would if I was going to do it, but at the same time, I think not including that was the absolute right decision because otherwise you're prescribing people how to tell these stories, and it could push you towards that line of trivializing things or making it Holocaust the game or something, so I think that decision, again, I bumped against it, but I think it was the right one.
Thank you. Yeah. I thought long and hard about that. And the conclusion I came to was that I didn't want, like you said, to tell people how to tell the stories. I wanted people to come to terms with the material their own way and figure out how they could use it or not use it in their stories, how it would be most meaningful and appropriate for them. And so I did not want to put tracks down for people to follow. I just said, here are possibilities. Follow where your heart takes you, basically. This was not a place to be prescriptive. This was a place to be delicate and to trust my readers, honestly, trust my players, that they would come to this with good hearts and open minds and pick this material up and carry it forward in a way that was meaningful and appropriate to them. And so, I mean, my feeling has always been that tabletop role-playing writing has been outward facing. We create the characters and the settings and the rules and the scenarios, whatever, that the players pick up and take and run their stories far beyond anything we put in a book. Even the most narrowly rail-driven adventure is something that people pick up and improvise with and run with and make bigger and make more. And this was very much a place where I just wanted to plant the seed and tend the garden and then let other people make it blossom in the ways that work for them, if I can abuse that metaphor.
Right. No, that makes sense. So I have another question. So as I read through the chapters on the locations, I tried to find references to the people, and it seemed that some of the characters are real people, but some I couldn't find, or their names were spelled very similarly. Were the authors given guidance to try to identify real life people and characters, or are they?
Can I give a concrete example from the text right before your question?
Sure.
Cool. So in the Terrazin section, there's a character called the Butterfly, and she was sent to Terrazin. She's Jewish. She's an artist, and she ends up spending a lot of time with the children in the concentration camp, and they call her the Butterfly because she keeps drawing pictures for them. Of course, she dies, and I read her character biography, and by the end, I think I was crying because I was just so moved, and I had the exact same thought Lou had, which is this a real person or not? So I Google it, and do you remember the answer to this, Rich?
It has been a long time, but I will say the book I Never Saw Another Butterfly was one that was put in my hands when I was very young, and that made a massive impact on me.
Yeah, when I Googled it, I find on one of the Holocaust websites the following. This poem was written by Pavel Friedman at Terezin concentration camp on 4 June 1942. On 29 September 1944, he was deported to Auschwitz, where he was murdered. and it's a poem about the last time he saw a butterfly, and it's only 2 stanzas, so I'm just gonna read it here. The butterfly. He was the last, truly the last. Such yellowness was bitter and blinding, like the sun's tear shattered on stone. That was his true color, and how easily he climbed, and how high, certainly climbing, he wanted to kiss the last of my world. I have been here 7 weeks, ghettoized. Who loved me have found me. Daisies call to me, and the branches also of the white chestnut in the yard. But I haven't seen a butterfly here. That last one was the last one. There are no butterflies here in the ghetto. So again, I had the same question that Lou did. So in that one case, I was like, well, the poem seems obviously to have been the inspiration for the character. But please, Lou, I think I cut you off as you were about to ask the question with that example. So please continue.
No, just some of them I was able to find, like several of the characters in the Ghetto of Warsaw chapter.
Mhm.
Um, Emily Landau, Mordecai Anowitz, I think.
Yeah,
I found
that's, yeah.
references to them. Others, like I said, I could find Rosa Rabata, actually from the Auschwitz-Birkenau chapter. But several others I could find similar spellings or something close. So I wasn't 100% certain if they were real. And then I also honestly got to feeling about, do I want them to be real people? Do we want to give game stats to real people that suffered these atrocities and did these things? So, I guess the first question is, did you ask the authors to identify real people, and how do you feel about this gamifying the people that went through this circumstance?
The direction that I gave to Mark and to Rob was I gave very strict external guidelines in the sandbox. And I told them I trusted them implicitly as writers, as researchers, and as human beings to do the best they could within that sandbox. And if that meant drawing on a historical character, then I wanted them to put a historical character who would be appropriate for the material there. If it meant taking a real story and fictionalizing it, combining two stories, whatever, and that was the best way to present the material, do it. And if it meant creating someone out of whole cloth who was nevertheless representative of the truth of what happened,
Right.
I had the trust in them to do that properly, of their researching skills, their writing skills, and their emotional honesty to do that.
Yeah.
And
of course, they didn't have the research capabilities and resources that we have now. There was no Google then, right?
No.
You couldn't Google, Emily Landau and find out her story the same way, right? It was a whole you could, but it was a lot more difficult. You ended up in some Usenet archives or something. And
yeah. Well, I knew Mark actually through graduate school. He was at Boston College at the same time I was. And the first class you got in grad school at Boston College was Library Research 101. And you lived in that library for 4 months, learning how to ferret out the tiniest scraps of information. So I knew that, and that was everything from reference books to journals to original sources. And so I had absolute faith in Mark to go get the good stuff. And I had absolute faith in Rob, who was had done really detailed research for a bunch of his other World of Darkness projects, to go and get the material because they had the research skills. And it wasn't as simple as a Google search, and it was a lot more legwork that went into it. But at the same time, they were willing to do it, and they had the skills and the techniques to do it. And I trusted what they came back with. And of course, I double checked because I had gone through that course, and I had my research brain on as well. But I wanted them to create stuff that was true to the material, and some of that was literal truth and some of that was emotional truth, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
Lou, can I ask you a hard question?
Sure.
Do you think that gamifying a victim of the Holocaust is more disrespectful than writing a novel where you would write historical fiction about someone who died in the Holocaust? Or would you say that both are equally perhaps unsavory?
I don't know that I don't know that I find it unsavory. I guess my reaction as I read it was, oh my, this is a real person. How do you put game stats? How do you even start that process to think about how you're going to reflect I should say, I kept up. I owned copies of all the World of Darkness books. I had read Vampire, I'd read Werewolf. I think I read Wraith.
Mhm.
Um,
I
you
get that
know,
a lot.
you know what? Well, and it's because,
Hmm.
we end up collecting a lot and getting a lot.
Hmm.
Um,
Planescape was the best thing for second edition AD&D, but it just didn't sell, man. Sometimes great works, but please continue. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. And so I didn't necessarily, readily, and it would have been 20 plus years since I'd read it anyway.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't readily recognize all the game stats and the sections, but I could tell what they were. And I went to White Wolf. I Googled a lot to like, okay, fetters are again. I need, just to remember
Hmm.
all that. But so yeah, I just it's such an interesting task, particularly um to ascribe these game mechanics and these different types of abilities and rules and things to real life people, but as well as, I mean, obviously we do it with fictional characters all the time, but
Hmm.
fictional characters deeply rooted in a real world setting.
Hmm.
Um, it's an interesting challenge. It must have been an interesting design challenge.
It very much was. I mean, part of it was that that precedent had long been set in the world of darkness. And from
Mm,
the very beginning, historical figures were incorporated into the mythology of vampire, of werewolf. And so there was a precedent. And building on that, I looked at it as okay, these are the tools to engage with those people's stories
right,
through the medium of this game. Yes, it's jarring. Yes, it takes you out of the story a little bit to see stats, but at the same time, these are the handles that you can use to get a grip on this character and bring them into a story in a way that is functional to
right,
tell
right,
the story. This is just the means of bringing them in, and
right, right.
that's where I ultimately ended, and that's where I was comfortable doing it with historical figures. And in many cases, I also, doubling back, thought this is a way to tell stories of people that might otherwise be lost, that might not otherwise be told to this audience, that are worth hearing for good and for bad.
Right.
A lot of these people, a lot of these characters are ones that I was introduced to in third grade, for example.
Hmm.
I was a bit of an aggressive reader on historical subjects, and these were stories that I came across very young. And even if I didn't understand them completely, they were still very impactful. And I knew these were stories that were worthy of telling again. And come back around, 20 years later, I'm in a position to tell those stories and present them in a way with these tools, with these rules, so that people can engage with them on their own terms.
Right. And for people fluent in the game, right? Fluent in
Mhm.
Wraith by ascribing or deciding they have this particular ability at this particular score, that
Mhm.
can tell a game master or a storyteller how to use this in a game and as you read through things, when you become fluent in a game's language, a simple little game statistic or rule or ability score suggest stories and
Very
suggest
much
ways
so.
to use
Yeah.
them, right?
And one of the brilliant things that was built into Wraith from the get-go by Jen and Sam Chop and everyone who helped create the game, the notions of passions and fetters, which tie the characters' motivations, the emotional drives, and the things that were important to them into the role playing. And so there was a concrete rules benefit to behaving in a way that was in line with your character's motivations and backstories and things like that. And that presented tremendous opportunities, particularly on this book.
Mm,
I have
yeah.
one question from the audience, if I may take a moment.
Of course.
Um, a Morgan McLeod or Morgan McLeod, I'm not quite sure which. I'm sorry, Morgan, of the University of Westminster would like to ask, uh, is there anything you look back on that you would change in the setting or mechanics in the time since this book was published?
Okay. This is a question that has layers to its answer.
Wow.
This is something that I worked on 30 years ago at a very different time, in a very different place, as a very different person. I remain incredibly proud of the work that my team did, that I did, of the impact this book has had, of the fact that on a certain level it remains vibrant. That being said, I challenge anybody to look at work they did 30 years prior and not say, I could have done better. There's material I would have given more elevation to. I would have insisted that we fix the one map that came out wrong because a layer in the graphic didn't print.
The one with the missing numbers on it. So right.
It was missing the country lines of Europe. It was the map of where the various sites were, and that we didn't realize that until the books came back, and it was too late to reprint, and so that was always very troubling to me. But again, in the context of the greater whole, the material was there for people to find on their own if it was that important to them, and it did not negatively impact the rest of the book, I feel. But yes, there are things I would change. I would try to tell more stories. I would bring more voices in. At the same time, I'm not the right person to do a book like this at this stage of my life. I've largely moved on from tabletop role playing. I can only hope that what I did with Charnel Houses, with the folks who worked on Charnel Houses, could inspire people to do more and different and better and advance the craft and advance the notion of using this medium to do powerful stuff like this. I'm proud that this was in many ways a first step on a road towards a certain type of role-playing and storytelling. I never, ever wanted to be the last or the only step. And I am just, my hope is for more people to pick up a banner that speaks to them and take chances like I took and tell stories that are meaningful to them. Now that, if there's one thing this book did, it was a breakout of the just for fun space.
Right.
And
well, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm rambling at this point.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting is it's hard for us to know whether we write a book about elves or we write a book like this, the ripples that it has on the impact, right? On a designer reads this book and realize, and even if they don't create another product that's as profound or as serious, it still impacts how they think, what they think the medium can do and what can happen. And so, there are obviously products that have visible influence. You can tell that certain products in the industry, in the history of role playing, have triggered events and theme and trends or whatever. But there's far more, many of these products, like most of the ones that we worked on, where you never know really how it impacted. There's no obvious trail between the release of book A and the subsequent creation of book B or C or some other piece, I have a couple other observations that are more on the gamey kind of side of things, if you don't mind. And so in one of the sections of the history chapter called Aftermath and the Shadowlands, it goes to a lot. This is where it goes into a lot of detail about the Holocaust impacting and changing the Shadowlands. And this speaks to a question that I had. So this book was published in 1997 about events that took place between 1939 and 1944. And I'm reading it in 2025. And my question is, at what point do I set my game? If I'm running this, am I running my game in 1997? Am I running my game in 1945? And again, this speaks to the right decision to not tell people how to use the book. But the other thing I noticed is all this change to the Shadowlands. Having worked on a meta plot cosmology heavy game line, I wondered if this introduced sort of like the whole retcon to your Wraith cosmology of what the Shadowlands were like. Like when when the game started and Jennifer laid was any thought given to the impact of events like this or Hiroshima or Nagasaki? I mean, those are other events that would be interesting to explore in the world of Wraith. Um, so do you, I mean, again, I don't want to trivialize the subject matter, but you understand, like, when you inherit a game, you have a certain cosmology, and now all of a sudden this is saying, oh, in this piece of the Shadowlands, things are very different. Um, I guess I'm not sure what my question is.
Okay, well, let me jump on what I think you're saying. And the way the book was very deliberately designed was, this is how things were in the immediate aftermath. So that information is there if you want to run with that. This is how things are at the moment of publication, if you want to tell that story. This is who these people are and what they want, so you can bring it forward as you wish. I am giving you those tools to pick it up and make it your own and do what you think feels right with the material. And so the goal was to be as broad and accessible and flexible as possible, to make this material as malleable, I guess is the right word, without losing its essential truth, in a way that people could, again, pick it up and tell the story that was meaningful to them using it, without locking them into stuff that would jar, that would bump, that would throw them out of the situation.
Right. And what's interesting about Wraith too is that, for the most part, to a large extent, the previous games in the World of Darkness, Vampire and Werewolf and Mage, the protagonists and the PCs live their lives, have their adventures in the real world, or the actual world. And Wraith introduces the Shadowlands, where they can go in both. And so it provided you with this other whole landscape that you could resculpt, if you will, based on the events of this. Whereas the events on these other aspects of the World of Darkness are mostly carried through the history of the characters, the experiences of the characters. Whereas in Wraith, you had this whole other world, a playground, if you will. Not to use, that's probably the wrong word, but you understand what I mean.
Sandbox. Let's say sandbox.
Right, sandbox. Right.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I loved Wraith. I still love Wraith. It is a glorious toolkit for a storyteller, for a game. You have the street level ghost stuff where you're interacting with the real world, dealing with your unfinished business. There is this antique classic horror aspect of it, of hauntings and ghosts and specters. There is the psychological horror of the shadow constantly being in your head. There is all of history to draw on, sitting on top of that island, the Tempest in Stygia, and you can pull any historical figure you want and have plots that are thousands of years old. And you can go crazy horror with diving into the labyrinth. You can go high fantasy with sailing across the Tempest to the far shores. It is an incredibly versatile setting, and I was in love with it basically from the get-go, because I saw the possibilities, and I was thankful for being trusted with this, honestly. And so, I will freely admit, the book The Risen was very much an attempt to cross back into that vampire werewolf physical world space, and maybe show players of those games what you could do with a Wraith that would then maybe get them to explore Wraith itself. But in the end, where it led me was an understanding and acceptance that Wraith was a very special thing, and it wasn't for everyone, but the players who got it really got it, and the players who loved it really loved it, and the experiences they had were really powerful and meaningful to them. And that was something that I was ultimately very comfortable with, as a creator. That, the Wraith community is still very strong. I interact with them a lot on Facebook, and I'm very thankful that this is something that has resonated with them through the decades, that they found their own stories to tell in this broad setting, and that they can share with each other and still communicate through the medium with this point of connection.
I can't believe it, but it's already been an hour.
Right. So I just another observation, and
Okay, go ahead. But if we go much longer, I'm gonna have to pay you guys more money.
well, it's all good.
Anything on top of this is a freebie. It's good.
That's right.
Right?
There you go.
Then you go, Lou.
Uh,
No
and
oblige.
it's on a much lighter note. But reading this, parts of it, particularly the sidebars, really brought me back to the 90s, into the um the whole style of game in the 90s, with deep cosmology and involved meta plots and lots of capitalized words, very specialized capitalized
So
words
many
that if you
proper
go,
Oh, yes.
nouns.
you know what I'm like, if you
Yes.
know it, you get it.
Mhm.
And I got enough of it to understand the point of it, but it really brought me back to that. You
Mhm.
know, like there was the World of Darkness games, there was Deadlands that was doing it back before. Brave New World was one of those,
Mhm.
you know, even Shadowrun and Earthdawn were pretty meta
Mhm.
plot heavy at the time.
Mhm.
And so it was a very much, oh, this is the world I was in. Yes, it was very much like we have our capitalized words, and we know what
Mhm.
they are. There weren't a lot of light notes reading this book. It was a very sobering experience. It reminded me, honestly, of watching Schindler's List in a way.
Mhm.
One of my experiences with Schindler's List was the the brutality became so commonplace that they had to accelerate it as you get further into the movie. The callousness with which that people are killed and disposed becomes so commonplace that they almost like had to ratchet up the degree of brutality to make it impactful. And it
Mhm.
felt the same, like you know, each of the chapters sort of builds on the atrocities of the ones before, and by the time you get to the Auschwitz-Birkenau chapter, you're like that quote I read. No one would believe it.
Mhm.
It feels unbelievable, and then but at the same time, deep down, you're confronted with the reality that it's all true and it's
Mhm.
all real, and that human beings did this to each other.
Yeah.
It's
The build was very much deliberate. How do we get to these places of horror step by step?
right.
The frog is in the water. It gets turned up 1 degree at a time until it's boiling. And so the build was very deliberately an escalation to create that effect, that impact. And at the end, you're going, oh my God, how did I get here? And it was very clear how you got there. And yeah, you're right.
Right.
It's a book that is very much a piece of darkness, is very much an unblinking examination. But I will throw this one tidbit out there. Um, it was always my belief that of all the World of Darkness games, Wraith was the one that actually had a moment of genuine hope in it. Um, the transcendence was real. You could
And the
strive to,
possibility, right? Yeah.
yeah, you could strive to resolve your fetters. You could strive to come to grips with your passions. You could finish your unfinished business in a very concrete and real way. And there was that hope. You could do something for yourself to find a better solution. And maybe that was not something that was very much present in that book, obviously, but in the wider space, the possibility existed. And that was always as foundational to Wraith as anything else I did.
Well, I'm going to close by saying that if someone asked me to prove that a tabletop role playing game could be a piece of art, I would probably hand them this and let this work make that argument for me.
Well, thank you.
And now that we are winding
Well,
down, I'm going to
you know,
go ahead, Lou.
yeah, I was going to say it's interesting. I think the listeners might be interested that I think what prompted this was during your last interview with Rich, in your introduction, you said Charnel Houses of Europe, the Shoah, which I believe, in my opinion, is the best supplement for the World of Darkness ever produced. And then you never got to talking about it. And I was waiting for it because in the back of my mind, I've had this thing about this um stance I took back in the day, right? This
Mhm.
sort of guilt that's carried with me, like, and I think I joked on Facebook. I'm like, I always secretly wondered if when Rich sees me, if he's, oh, I hate that guy. He has reassured me that's not the case, and I'm very, very thankful for that. And so, but on a Facebook post, I was waiting for you to talk about this because here's my story. And that's when you reached out about this. And so I'm glad I was able to bring that up because I think this is a product that's definitely worth this book club approach. I'd be fascinated to find out what other books you think you might want to do this with.
I'll ask my listeners, but I got to tell you, I feel like this has been a perfect episode in so many ways, and I can't thank both of you enough for being on it. That said, Rich, what do you have any upcoming publications, games, novels, movies that my listeners should be aware of?
Well, my next release will be the nonfiction book, The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving an Industry That Hates You. It's a distillation of my 25 years plus in the video game industry as a writer into what is essentially a survival guide as to how to do the job. There are innumerable books and lectures and whatever else about how to write video games, how to do dialogue, how to do this sort of thing, how to use this tool. But there's been, in my opinion, a void in terms of how do you survive day to day? How do you build feedback loops? How do you interact with other departments? How do you get your words from you to the player in the best way possible? And so this is 25 years of bumps and bruises and occasional triumphs and occasional tragedies, all distilled into a hopefully humorous and useful guide to getting to a place where you're doing the job better in a way that helps you do better work. And I'm very proud of the book. And I jokingly tell people, one, that it took me 25 years to write and 6 months to type. And two, that the original title of the book was McDonald's French Fries because it was so salty.
That's great. Well, Lou, can I ask you, is there anything people can buy that'll put royalties in your pocket?
Yes. So I'm not writing much in the game world, writing anything that's being published in the game world these days. But if people are watching, anyone watching this on YouTube will see that my background is a picture of Cinderella Castle from Disney World. I'm a big fan of Disney parks and specifically of Imagineering, what Walt Disney called the blending of creative imagination and technical know-how. And I've written 3 books about applying principles of Disney Imagineering to other creative fields, because I think it's the ideal expression of creativity. It involves so many different disciplines and so much work, and it's such a varied type of practice. And in 2 of my books, there's dedicated chapters on game design where I take references from my work, my life, my experience, and talk about some of these principles and tools and how I used them. I hadn't labeled them the same way back then, but so they're a book series called the Imagineering Toolbox, and they're available in softcover and hardcover and ebook on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and an audiobook for the first 2 of them are also on Audible. So.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. I love a good Disney park, so that's great to hear. Well, gentlemen, if I ever have cause to have either of you back on again, I would love to. This has been incredible. And again, I know I just said it, but I can't thank you enough for being on here. So you guys have a great night, okay?
Thank you so much for having us. This was a real pleasure.